Can you take her instead of me? Those 6 words stopped a hardened rancher dead in his tracks and changed 3 lives forever. In the scorching hell of a Texas slave market, a 4-year-old girl made an impossible choice, offering her own mother to a stranger just to save her from something worse. The rancher said nothing. He just reached for his gold and took them both. What happened next tore through the frontier like wildfire, a desperate rescue, a brutal gunfight, and a love born from the ashes of broken souls. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat came down like a punishment. Texas, 1870, late August. The kind of afternoon where the sun didn't just warm the earth, it branded it. The border livestock market sat like a festering wound on the edge of civilization, a sprawling maze of wooden pens and canvas tarps where anything with a price could be bought, sold, or traded. Horses, cattle, guns, whiskey, and people. Silas Ward didn't come here for people. He came for horse medicine, a tin of salve his mare desperately needed for an infected hoof. He was a man of 43 winters, tall and lean as a fence post, with a face carved by grief and a scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw. His eyes were the color of winter fog, distant and unreadable. He wore dust-covered boots, a dark coat despite the heat, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He kept to himself. Always had. The market stank of sweat, manure, and desperation. Voices shouted in English and Spanish, haggling over prices, cursing over cards, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Silas moved through the crowd like a ghost, his hand resting instinctively on the pistol at his hip. He didn't trust crowds, didn't trust noise, didn't trust much of anything anymore. He found the medicine stall wedged between a blacksmith's forge and a tobacco vendor. The proprietor, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth, grinned at him. "Silas Ward, ain't seen you in months. Thought maybe you'd finally gone and died out there on that lonely ranch of yours." Silas didn't smile. "The salve. Right to business. I like that." The man ducked behind his counter, rummaging through jars and tins. "Got it here somewhere. You know, you could stand to be a little friendlier. Might do you some good." "Might not." The proprietor chuckled, shaking his head. "Suit yourself." Silas paid in silence, tucking the tin into his coat pocket. He turned to leave, and that's when he heard it. A voice, small, trembling, desperate. "Please, mister, please." He stopped. It wasn't the words that caught him. It was the tone, the kind of fear that came from a place beyond tears, beyond begging, the kind that lived in the marrow. Silas turned slowly. At the edge of the crowd, near the shadowed pens where livestock waited to be sold, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her skin was sun-darkened, her black hair tangled and matted with dust. She wore a dress that might have been white once, but was now the color of rust and earth. Her bare feet were caked in mud, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were the eyes of someone far older than her years, wide, haunted, drowning in a terror she couldn't name. She was tugging on the coat of a man walking past, a rancher in a clean hat, his face flushed red from drink. He shook her off like she was a fly. "Get off me, girl." "Please," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "Please, mister." The man spat on the ground and walked away. Silas felt something twist in his chest, a sensation he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. He started walking toward her before he even realized he was moving. The girl saw him coming. Her eyes locked onto his, desperate and pleading. She stumbled forward, her small hands reaching out. "Mister," she gasped. "Mister, please." Silas stopped in front of her. Up close, he could see the bruises on her arms, the dirt smeared across her cheeks, the way her whole body trembled. "What is it?" His voice was rough, unused to gentleness. The girl's lip quivered. She pointed toward the pens behind her, the ones covered in shadow, the ones people didn't look at too closely. "My mama," she whispered. "They're going to take her away. They said she's no good. They're going to—" Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her face. "Please, mister, can you take her instead of me?" Silas went still. The world seemed to narrow to just this moment, this child, these words. "What did you say?" The girl sobbed, clutching at his coat with desperate fingers. "Take her instead, please. I'm little. I can work. I can be good. But she's hurt, and they're gonna— Please, mister, please, take her instead of me." Something inside Silas cracked. He'd heard plenty of terrible things in his life. He'd seen men die slow. He'd buried his wife and daughter in the same grave after a storm tore through his ranch 6 years ago. He'd lived with ghosts every day since. But this was different. "Show me," he said quietly. The girl's eyes widened with hope so fierce it was almost painful to see. She grabbed his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around two of his, and pulled him toward the pens. They moved through the crowd, past the livestock, past the trading stalls, into the shadowed corner where the air smelled like blood and fear. There were pens here too, but these weren't for animals. Silas's jaw tightened. Inside the largest pen, a group of people sat huddled together. Men, women, a few children. They were bound at the wrists, their faces hollow with exhaustion and resignation. Guards stood nearby, armed with rifles, watching with the bored expressions of men who'd seen this 1,000 times before. The girl pulled him to the far corner of the pen. "There," she whispered, pointing. "That's my mama." Silas looked. A woman sat slumped against the wooden post, her wrists bound with rough rope, her head bowed. Her long black hair fell across her face, tangled and matted. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing a dark bruise that spread across her collarbone like a stain. Her breathing was shallow, labored. She wasn't moving. "Mama," the girl called softly, pressing her face against the wooden slats. "Mama, wake up!" The woman stirred. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head, and Silas saw her face. She was young, maybe 30, maybe less. Her features were sharp and beautiful despite the bruises, her skin the color of desert clay. But it was her eyes that struck him. Even through the pain, even through the exhaustion, they burned with something fierce and unbroken. She saw the girl, and her expression shattered. "Maribel," she rasped, her voice raw. "No. No, mija, you shouldn't be here. You need to—" "I brought help, Mama," Maribel said, her voice bright with desperate hope. "I found a man. He's gonna help." The woman's gaze shifted to Silas. For a moment their eyes met, and he saw everything in that single glance. The terror, the shame, the resignation, the fierce, desperate love of a mother who would endure anything to keep her child safe. She looked away first, her face crumpling. "Go away," she whispered. "Please, just take Maribel and go." "Ma'am, I said go!" Her voice cracked, breaking into a sob. "There's nothing you can do. I'm already—" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Just take her, please. She's all I have. Just take her and go." Silas stood there, silent. One of the guards noticed him, a big man with a scar across his nose and a rifle slung over his shoulder. He walked over, grinning. "You interested in that one?" He jerked his thumb toward Elena. "Bad news, friend. She's already been sold. Fellow who bought her said she's too damaged. Gonna haul her off to the work camps up north. But if you want the kid—" He glanced at Maribel. "She might fetch a decent price. Young ones usually do." The guard laughed. Silas didn't. "How much?" he said quietly. The guard blinked. "What?" "For the woman. How much?" The guard frowned, scratching his beard. "Like I said, she's already— How much?" Silas's voice was flat, cold. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip. The guard's grin faded. He glanced at Silas's gun, then back at his face. Something in those winter gray eyes made him take a step back. "Look, mister, I don't make the rules. How much?" A long pause. Then the guard sighed. $50, gold. "And the child?" "20. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out the coins slowly, deliberately, and dropped them into the guard's outstretched hand. $70, gold. The guard stared at the coins, then at Silas. "You serious?" "Open the pen." The guard hesitated, then shrugged. "Your funeral, friend." He unlocked the gate, swinging it open with a creak of rusted hinges. Silas stepped inside. The other prisoners shrank back, but Elena didn't move. She stared at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Silas didn't answer. He knelt in front of her, pulling a knife from his belt. She flinched, but he simply cut the ropes binding her wrists. They fell away, leaving deep red marks in her skin. "Can you stand?" he asked. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. You don't—" "Can you stand?" Elena tried. Her legs buckled immediately, and she collapsed forward. Silas caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady and sure. "I've got you," he said quietly. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. She was trembling, her body racked with fever and exhaustion. She tried to push him away, but she had no strength left. "Maribel," she gasped. "I'm here, Mama." The little girl was already at Silas's side, her hand clutching his coat. Silas turned and walked out of the pen, carrying Elena in his arms, Maribel following close behind. The market went silent. Every eye turned toward them. The guards, the traders, the buyers. The crowd parted like water as Silas moved through it, his expression unreadable, his steps steady and deliberate. No one stopped him. No one dared. He reached his horse, a sturdy gray mare tied to a post near the edge of the market. He laid Elena gently across the saddle, then lifted Maribel up in front of her. "Hold on to your mama," he said. Maribel nodded, wrapping her small arms around Elena's waist. Silas swung up into the saddle behind them, his arms forming a protective cage around mother and child. He took the reins and urged the mare forward, leaving the border livestock market behind without a single glance back. They rode in silence for hours. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The heat eased, replaced by a cool breeze that whispered through the tall grass. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, her head resting against Silas's chest. Maribel stayed awake, her eyes wide and watchful, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. "Home," Silas said. "Where's home?" "North, about 10 miles. Are you going to keep us?" Silas was silent for a long moment. Then, "For now." Maribel nodded as if that answer was enough. They reached Silas's ranch just as the stars began to appear. It was a modest place, a 2-story house built of weathered wood, a barn, a few corrals, and endless stretches of grassland rolling toward the distant hills. The house was dark, the windows empty. It looked like a place where time had stopped. Silas dismounted, carefully lifting Elena from the saddle. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Where—" she began. "You're safe," Silas said. "You're with me now." He carried her inside, Maribel trailing behind. The house smelled of dust and disuse. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, pushing open a door at the end of the hall. It was a small bedroom, a single bed with a quilted blanket, a wooden dresser, a window overlooking the prairie. The room was untouched, preserved like a shrine. A child's room, his daughter's room. Silas hadn't stepped foot in here since the day he buried her. He laid Elena on the bed, pulling the blanket over her. She was shaking, her skin burning with fever. He fetched water from the well, clean cloth from the kitchen, and spent the next hour gently cleaning her wounds, washing the dirt and blood from her face and arms. She didn't speak. She just watched him with those fierce, unreadable eyes. When he finished, he stood. "Rest. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." "Why?" she whispered. Silas paused in the doorway. "Why what? Why did you do it? Why did you buy us? What do you want?" He turned to look at her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "I don't want anything." He walked out, closing the door softly behind him. Downstairs, Maribel sat at the kitchen table, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. Silas warmed some soup over the stove, plain, simple, but hot. He set a bowl in front of her. "Eat." She ate slowly, carefully, as if she wasn't sure the food was real. When she finished, Silas led her upstairs to a small guest room across the hall from her mother. He set a blanket on the bed, lit a candle on the nightstand. "You'll sleep here." Maribel climbed into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She looked so small, so fragile. "Mister?" she said softly. Yeah? Thank you. Silas nodded. He turned to leave. Mister? He stopped. Are you going to make us leave? Silas looked back at her. In the candlelight, her eyes were the same as his daughter's had been, wide, hopeful, afraid. No, he said. I'm not. He closed the door. That night, Silas didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, staring out at the dark prairie, a cup of cold coffee in his hand. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it memories he'd tried to bury. His wife's laugh, his daughter's smile, the storm that took them both. He'd sworn he'd never let anyone into this house again. He'd sworn he'd live alone, die alone, and let the ghosts keep him company. But tonight, the house felt different. For the first time in 6 years, it didn't feel empty. Upstairs, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her body ached, her wrists throbbed. But for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt something other than fear. She felt safe. And that terrified her more than anything, because safety, she'd learned, was always temporary. Always. Across the hall, Maribel was already asleep, curled up beneath the blanket, her small face peaceful for the first time in days. And downstairs, Silas Ward sat alone in the darkness, a man who'd thought his life was over, wondering what the hell he'd just done. 3 broken people, 3 wounded souls, all under one roof. The storm that brought them together was over, but the one that would define them? That was only just beginning. Dawn came slow and uncertain, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Silas woke before the sun, same as he always did. His body was stiff from sleeping in the chair on the porch, his neck aching from the angle he'd slumped into somewhere around 3 in the morning. He stood, rolling his shoulders, and walked inside to start the fire in the stove. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For 6 years, that silence had been his companion, cold, familiar, undemanding. But this morning it felt different. This morning, the silence had weight to it, expectation. He made coffee, strong and black the way he'd always taken it. As the pot began to boil, he heard a sound from upstairs. Soft footsteps. A door creaking open. Silas tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his pistol before he caught himself. It was just the girl. Maribel appeared at the top of the stairs, her black hair sticking up in every direction, her bare feet silent on the wooden steps. She clutched the blanket around her shoulders like a cloak, her dark eyes wide and cautious as she descended. She stopped at the bottom step, staring at him. Silas stared back. "Morning," he said finally. She didn't answer, just watched him with that unnerving intensity children sometimes had, the kind that saw everything and judged nothing. "You hungry?" he asked. A small nod. Silas turned back to the stove, cracking eggs into a cast-iron pan. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage the basics. Eggs, bacon, bread toasted over the fire. Simple, functional. Maribel climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, still wrapped in her blanket, still watching. "Your mama still sleeping?" Silas asked, not looking at her. Another nod. "Good. She needs the rest." He set a plate in front of her, eggs scrambled with a bit of salt, 2 strips of bacon, a piece of bread. Maribel stared at it like it might vanish if she blinked. "Go on," Silas said. "It's yours." She picked up the fork slowly, carefully, and took a bite. Then another. Then she was eating quickly, hungrily, like someone who'd learned not to trust when the next meal might come. Silas poured himself coffee and sat across from her, watching her eat. She didn't look up, didn't speak, just ate with singular focus until the plate was clean. When she finished, she set down the fork and finally met his eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." Silence stretched between them. Silas sipped his coffee. Maribel pulled the blanket tighter. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. "Silas." "Silas," she repeated, testing the word. "That's a good name." "It's just a name." "My name's Maribel, but Mama calls me Mari sometimes." "Maribel's a good name too." She smiled then, just a flicker, barely there, but real. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, and something about it made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. "Can I help?" she asked, gesturing toward the dishes. Silas glanced at the plate, the pan, the coffee pot. "You know how to wash dishes?" "Mama taught me. I'm good at it." He nodded slowly. All right, there's a basin by the pump outside. Water's cold, but it works. Maribel slipped off the chair, still dragging her blanket, and carried the dishes outside. Silas followed, showing her how to work the hand pump, how to scrub the plates clean with a rag and a bit of lye soap. She worked carefully, methodically, her small hands moving with practiced efficiency. She didn't complain about the cold water, didn't ask for help, just did the work and did it well. When she finished, she looked up at him, waiting for approval. Good job, Silas said. Her smile came easier this time. They went back inside. Silas poured himself another cup of coffee and settled into the chair by the window, staring out at the prairie. Maribel climbed back onto her chair at the table, wrapping the blanket around herself again. What do you do all day? She asked. Work, fix things, take care of the animals. What animals? Horses, few chickens, used to have cattle, but I sold most of them. Why? Didn't need them anymore. Why not? Silas glanced at her. She was watching him with open curiosity, her head tilted slightly to one side. You ask a lot of questions, he said. Mama says curious people learn more. Your mama's right. Maribel seemed satisfied with that answer. She swung her legs beneath the chair, her bare feet not quite reaching the floor. Can I see the horses? She asked. Silas considered it. Your mama know you're down here? She's sleeping. When she wakes up, she's going to worry if you're not there. Maribel's face fell. Oh, Silas sighed. He wasn't good at this, at talking to children, at knowing what they needed. His daughter had been easy. She'd laughed at everything, chattered constantly, filled every silence with light. But Maribel was different, quieter, more careful. Tell you what, he said, you go sit at the bottom of the stairs where you can hear if your mama calls. I'll bring you something to do. Her eyes brightened. Okay. She scurried to the stairs, settling on the bottom step with her blanket wrapped around her. Silas rummaged through a trunk in the corner of the room and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were scraps of fabric, a needle, thread. He carried it over and set it beside her. You know how to sew? Maribel nodded eagerly. These are scraps, not good for much, but you can practice with them if you want. Make whatever you like. She opened the box carefully, her eyes wide with wonder as she touched the colorful pieces of cloth. Really? Really? Thank you, Silas. It was the first time she'd said his name without hesitation, and hearing it, his name in her small, earnest voice, stirred something in him he'd thought was long dead. He nodded and walked away before she could see his face. Upstairs, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from below. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Panic seized her chest, the instinct to run, to hide, to protect herself from whatever was coming next. But then she registered the softness of the bed beneath her, the clean blanket covering her body, the quiet stillness of the room. She was safe. The memory came back in fragments. The market. The pen. The little girl tugging on a stranger's coat. The man with winter-gray eyes who'd paid gold for her freedom without asking for anything in return. Elena sat up slowly, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. Her wrists were bandaged, clean white cloth wrapped carefully around the rope burns. Someone had washed her face, her arms. Someone had dressed her wounds. Him, the stranger. Silas. She looked around the room. It was small but well kept. A child's room, she realized. There were faint marks on the wall where pictures had once hung. A small wooden horse sat on the dresser, covered in dust. This room belonged to someone. Someone who wasn't here anymore. Elena's throat tightened. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking beneath her. She was still wearing the torn dress from yesterday, but someone had draped a clean shirt over the back of the chair. A man's shirt, far too big for her, but warm. She pulled it on over her dress and made her way to the door. The hallway was dim and quiet. She could hear voices downstairs, low, murmuring. One of them was Maribel. Elena's heart lurched. She moved quickly despite the pain, gripping the banister as she descended the stairs. At the bottom, she found Maribel sitting cross-legged on the floor. A pile of colorful fabric scraps spread around her. She was humming softly to herself as she stitched two pieces together with careful concentration. Maribel, Elena breathed. The girl's head snapped up. her face breaking into a radiant smile. "Mama!" She dropped the fabric and ran to Elena, throwing her arms around her waist. Elena sank to her knees, pulling her daughter close, burying her face in Maribel's hair. "Are you okay?" Elena whispered, her voice shaking. "Did anyone hurt you? Did he—" "I'm okay, Mama. I'm good. Silas gave me breakfast and let me wash the dishes, and now I'm making something. Look!" She pulled Elena over to the pile of fabric, pointing proudly at her handiwork, a crude but earnest attempt at stitching a small pouch. Elena stared at it, then at her daughter, her mind reeling. "He gave you breakfast?" she repeated. "Eggs and bacon. It was really good. And he said I did a good job washing the dishes. And he's really nice, Mama. He doesn't talk much, but he's nice." Elena's hands tightened on Maribel's shoulders. "Where is he?" "Outside, doing chores." Elena stood, her jaw set. "Stay here." "Mama, stay here, mija. I'll be right back." She walked through the house, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, and stepped out onto the porch. The morning air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of grass and earth. In the distance, she could see the barn, the corrals, the endless stretch of prairie rolling toward the horizon. And she saw him. Silas stood near the barn, repairing a section of fence. His back was to her, his movements slow and deliberate as he hammered a nail into the wood. His coat was off, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong, scarred forearms. Elena stepped off the porch and walked toward him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You!" she called out. Silas stopped hammering. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're awake," he said. "What do you want from us?" Elena demanded, her voice sharp. Silas set down the hammer. "Nothing." "Liar. Everyone wants something. You didn't buy us out of kindness. Men like you don't." Her voice cracked. "What do you want? Just tell me, so I know, so I can—" "Nothing," Silas repeated, his tone flat. "I don't want anything from you." Elena stared at him, her chest heaving. "Then why? Why did you do it?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said simply, "Because no one else would." The words hit her like a blow. "That's not an answer," she said, but her voice was weaker now, uncertain. "It's the only one I've got." Elena's hands trembled. She wanted to yell at him, to accuse him, to push him away before he could hurt her the way every other man in her life had hurt her. But the way he looked at her, calm, steady, without expectation, disarmed her completely. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Sheba, you don't have to. I don't trust you. I don't expect you to." She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense." Silas picked up the hammer again. "You and the girl can stay as long as you need. There's food in the kitchen, water from the pump, spare clothes in the chest upstairs." He paused, glancing at her. "The door's not locked. You want to leave? You can leave." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Silas turned back to the fence and resumed his work. She stood there for a moment longer, watching him, trying to make sense of the man who'd bought her freedom and asked for nothing in return. Finally, she turned and walked back to the house. Inside, Maribel was still stitching, her tongue poking out in concentration. "Mama, look! I almost finished it!" Elena knelt beside her, forcing a smile. "It's beautiful, mija." Maribel beamed. Elena pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to her daughter. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. The days began to blur together in a rhythm Elena hadn't known in years. Silas kept his distance. He was always working, fixing fences, tending to the horses, chopping wood, repairing the roof. He ate his meals alone, usually outside or in the barn, and spoke only when necessary. But he was never unkind. He left fresh water by Elena's door every morning. He made sure there was food on the table. When he noticed Maribel shivering in her thin dress, he brought her a wool blanket without a word. Elena watched him carefully, waiting for the trap to spring, waiting for him to demand payment, waiting for him to show his true intentions. But the days passed, and he did nothing. He didn't touch her, didn't leer at her, didn't even look at her longer than necessary. It unnerved her more than anger ever could. One afternoon, nearly a week after they'd arrived, Elena found herself standing in the kitchen, staring at the pile of unwashed dishes in the basin. Silas had been out since dawn, and Maribel was napping upstairs. Elena rolled up her sleeves and began to wash them. She didn't have to. Silas hadn't asked. But sitting idle made her feel like a burden, and if there was one thing Elena Cruz refused to be, it was helpless. She was scrubbing a cast iron pan when the door opened behind her. Silas stepped inside, dust covering his boots, his face shadowed beneath his hat. He stopped when he saw her at the basin. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." He didn't move. "You should be resting." "I've rested enough." Silas watched her for a moment, then nodded slowly and turned to leave. "Wait," Elena said, surprising herself. He stopped. She set down the pan, wiping her hands on a rag. "Why do you sleep on the floor?" Silas frowned. "What?" "Every night. I hear you. Outside my door. You sleep on the floor in the hallway." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" Silas's jaw tightened. "So you feel safe." The simplicity of the answer stole her breath. "That's all?" she asked. "That's all." Elena stared at him, her throat tightening. "You don't have to do that." "I know." "Then why?" "Because you flinch every time I walk into a room," Silas said quietly. "Because your daughter watches me like she's waiting for me to turn into a monster. Because you've been hurt, and I'm not going to add to that." He met her eyes. "So I sleep on the floor, and I'll keep sleeping on the floor until you don't need me to anymore." Elena's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't afraid, that she didn't need his protection. But the words wouldn't come, because he was right. Silas turned and walked out, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding against her ribs. That night, Elena lay awake in the small bedroom, staring at the ceiling. She could hear him outside the door, the faint sound of his breathing, the creak of the floorboards as he shifted his weight. He was there, keeping watch, asking for nothing. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elena felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen, just a little. But enough. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, so slowly Elena almost didn't notice, things began to change. Maribel stopped flinching when Silas walked past. She started following him around the ranch, peppering him with questions he answered in short, gruff sentences that somehow satisfied her completely. "Why do horses wear shoes? So their hooves don't crack." "Why don't people wear horseshoes?" "Because we've got boots." "Can I wear horseshoes?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you're not a horse." Maribel giggled at that, and Silas, despite himself, almost smiled. Elena watched from the porch, mending one of Maribel's dresses, her needle moving in steady, practiced strokes. She saw the way Silas shortened his stride so Maribel could keep up, the way he lifted her onto the fence so she could see the horses better, the way he caught her when she stumbled, his hands gentle and sure. He was good with her, patient, kind. It terrified Elena, because kindness, in her experience, always came with a price. One evening, as the sun set in shades of gold and crimson, Silas came in from the barn to find Elena in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew over the fire. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. "You made dinner," he said. Elena didn't look at him. "You've been feeding us for weeks. Seemed only fair. You didn't have to." "I know." Silas hesitated, then walked to the table and sat down. Elena ladled stew into 3 bowls and set one in front of him. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, then called upstairs. "Maribel, dinner!" The girl came thundering down the stairs, her face bright with excitement. She climbed into her chair and dug into her stew with enthusiasm. For the first time since they'd arrived, the 3 of them ate together. It was awkward at first, silent. But then Maribel started talking about the chickens she'd fed, the horse that had nuzzled her hand, the flower she'd found growing by the fence, and the silence broke like ice thawing in spring. Silas listened. Elena watched him listen, and something inside her softened just a little more. After dinner, Maribel yawned hugely, her eyes drooping. "Time for bed, mija," Elena said. "But I'm not tired," Maribel protested, even as she yawned again. Silas stood. Come on, I'll carry you up. Maribel's eyes widened. Really? He nodded. She climbed into his arms without hesitation, resting her head on his shoulder. Silas carried her upstairs, Elena following close behind. He set Maribel down gently on her bed and pulled the blanket over her. "Good night, Silas," Maribel murmured, already half asleep. "Good night, Mari." Elena's breath caught. It was the first time he'd called her that. Silas stepped back, nodding to Elena, and left the room. Elena tucked Maribel in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Sweet dreams, mi amor." "Mama?" "Yes?" "I like it here." Elena's throat tightened. "Me too, mija." "Do you think we can stay?" Elena didn't know how to answer that, so she just smoothed Maribel's hair and whispered, "We'll see." But as she closed the door and stepped into the hallway, she found Silas standing there, his back against the wall, his head tilted back, staring at the ceiling. "She's asleep," Elena said softly. Silas nodded. For a moment, neither of them moved. "You're good with her," Elena said finally. "Better than I expected." "I had a daughter once." The words came out quiet, almost reluctant. Elena's eyes widened. "You—" "Storm took her. 6 years ago. Her and my wife." Silas's voice was flat, emotionless. "This was her room. The one you're sleeping in." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have—" "It's all right," Silas said. "It's been empty too long." He pushed off the wall and started toward the stairs. "Silas," Elena called after him. He stopped, glancing back. "Thank you," she said. "For everything?" He looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, and something passed between them. Something unspoken but deeply felt. "You're welcome," he said. And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs. Elena stood alone in the hallway, her heart pounding, her mind racing. He'd lost everything, just like she had, and yet he'd still found room in his broken heart to save them. She returned to her room and lay down on the bed that had once belonged to his daughter, and for the first time in years, Elena Cruz allowed herself to cry. Not from fear, not from pain, but from something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The peace lasted exactly 23 days. Elena would remember that number for the rest of her life. 23 days of waking to sunlight instead of fear. 23 days of watching Maribel laugh as she chased chickens across the yard. 23 days of quiet meals, careful conversations, and the slow, tentative rebuilding of something she'd thought was lost forever. Trust. On the morning of the 24th day, everything shattered. It started with the dogs. Silas kept 2 hounds, lean, scarred animals he'd raised from pups. They weren't pets, not exactly, but they were loyal and they knew the difference between friend and threat. That morning, just after dawn, they started barking. Not their usual alert, but something frantic, desperate. Silas was in the barn, mucking out stalls when he heard them. He dropped the pitchfork immediately and reached for the rifle he kept mounted near the door. Something was wrong. He moved quickly across the yard, his boots kicking up dust, his eyes scanning the horizon. The dogs were at the edge of the property, teeth bared, hackles raised, barking at something beyond the fence line. 3 riders. Silas's jaw tightened. They were still a quarter-mile out, moving slow and deliberate across the prairie. Even from this distance, he could see the glint of metal, rifles slung across their saddles, pistols at their hips. They weren't passing through. They were coming here. Silas turned and ran back to the house. He burst through the door, startling Elena, who was kneading dough at the kitchen table. "Get Maribel," he said, his voice sharp and urgent. "Get her and go upstairs. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." Elena's eyes widened. "What's happening?" "Someone's coming. Go! Now!" The fear in his voice, a tone she'd never heard from him before, sent ice through her veins. She didn't ask questions. She ran upstairs, grabbed Maribel from her room where she'd been playing with her fabric scraps, and pulled her into the bedroom. "Mama, what's wrong?" Maribel asked, frightened by the sudden urgency. "Shh, mija, we need to be very quiet." Elena locked the door and pulled Maribel away from the window, pressing her back against the wall. Downstairs, Silas loaded his rifle with practiced efficiency, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He checked his pistol, made sure his knife was in his boot, and stepped out onto the porch. The riders were closer now, maybe 200 yards. He could make out their faces, and he recognized one of them, Jeb Mercer. Silas felt something cold settle in his gut. Mercer was a trafficker, one of the men who ran the trade routes through the border markets. Silas had seen him before, heard stories. Mercer wasn't just cruel. He was smart, calculating, the kind of man who didn't give up once he'd set his sights on something, or someone. The three riders crossed onto Silas's property, their horses moving at an easy trot. They stopped about 50 feet from the house, forming a loose line. Jeb Mercer sat in the middle, a big man with a thick beard, a scar running down his left cheek, and eyes like a snake. He wore a long coat despite the heat, and his right hand rested casually on the pistol at his hip. "Morning," Mercer called out, his voice carrying across the yard. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Fine day, ain't it?" Silas didn't lower his rifle. "Get off my land." Mercer's smile widened. "Now, is that any way to greet visitors? We rode a long way to have a conversation with you." "We got nothing to talk about." "Oh, I think we do." Mercer leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes glittering. "See, I'm looking for something that belongs to me. A woman, Mexican, 30 years old, give or take. Got a little girl with her. Dark hair, dark eyes." He paused. "Ring any bells?" Silas's finger moved to the trigger. "I said get off my land." "She's mine," Mercer said, his voice hardening. "I got papers that say so. Legal and proper. You took her from the market without authorization. That's theft, friend." "I paid for her. Gold. Your man took it." Mercer waved a hand dismissively. "That transaction wasn't authorized. Far as I'm concerned, you stole my property, and I want her back." "She's not property, and she's not going anywhere." One of the other riders, a younger man with a pockmarked face and a nervous energy, spoke up. "Just give us the woman, mister. We don't want no trouble." "Then leave," Silas said flatly. Mercer sighed, shaking his head like a disappointed schoolteacher. "I was hoping we could settle this peaceful-like, but you're making this difficult." He straightened in his saddle. "I'm going to give you one chance. Bring the woman out here, now, and maybe, I'll let you keep breathing." "No." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Mercer's smile vanished. "You got any idea who you're dealing with?" "Don't care." "You will." Mercer nodded to the man on his right, a tall, lanky figure with a rifle across his lap. "Show him." The man raised his rifle, aiming it at the barn, and fired. The shot echoed across the prairie. In the barn, one of Silas's horses screamed, a high, terrified sound that cut straight to the bone. Silas's vision went red. "Next one goes through your window," Mercer said calmly. "Then maybe the door. Then maybe we just burn the whole damn place down. You got a choice here, friend. Make the smart one." Upstairs, Elena pressed her hand over Maribel's mouth, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She could hear everything, the voices, the gunshot, the awful scream of the injured horse. They'd come for her. Of course they had. She should have known, should have expected this, should have run the moment she had the chance. Now Silas was going to die because of her. Maribel whimpered against her palm, tears streaming down her face. Elena pulled her closer, her own tears falling silently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, mija." Outside, Silas lowered his rifle slowly, deliberately. Mercer grinned. "That's better. See? We can be reasonable men." Silas set the rifle against the porch railing. Then he drew his pistol and fired. The shot took the lanky man in the shoulder, spinning him half out of his saddle. He screamed, clutching at the wound as blood poured between his fingers. Chaos erupted. The pockmarked man drew his pistol, firing wildly. A bullet splintered the porch post inches from Silas's head. Silas dove behind the railing, firing twice more. One shot went wide. The other hit the pockmarked man's horse, and the animal reared, throwing its rider. Mercer wheeled his horse around, drawing his own weapon. "Kill him!" he roared. The lanky man, still in his saddle despite his wound, raised his rifle one-handed. Silas rolled to the side as a shot tore through the spot where he'd been crouching. He came up firing, and this time his aim was true. The lanky man jerked backward and fell from his horse, hitting the ground hard and not moving. The pockmarked man scrambled to his feet, fumbling for his pistol. Silas shot him in the leg. He went down screaming. That left Mercer. The big man spurred his horse forward, firing as he rode. Bullets tore into the porch, the door, the window. Silas felt something hot slice across his upper arm. Not a direct hit, but close enough. He gritted his teeth against the pain and aimed carefully. One shot. It caught Mercer in the side, just below the ribs. The impact knocked him sideways in his saddle, but he didn't fall. He jerked his horse to a halt, one hand pressed to his bleeding side, his face twisted in rage and pain. "This ain't over," he snarled. "You hear me? This ain't—" Silas fired again. This shot hit Mercer's horse in the flank. The animal bolted, carrying its wounded rider across the prairie at a full gallop. Silence fell like a curtain. Silas stood slowly, his pistol still raised, watching until Mercer disappeared over the horizon. The pockmarked man was curled on the ground, whimpering and clutching his bleeding leg. The lanky man wasn't moving at all. Silas's arm burned. Blood soaked through his sleeve, dripping onto the porch. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that always came after violence. He holstered his pistol and walked over to the pockmarked man. The man looked up at him, eyes wide with terror. "Get your friend and get out," Silas said quietly. "If I ever see you on my land again, I'll kill you. Understand?" The man nodded frantically. "Go." The pockmarked man dragged himself to his feet, limping over to where the lanky man lay. He checked for a pulse, found none, and grabbed the dead man's arms, dragging him toward the remaining horses. Silas watched until they were gone, then turned back to the house. The door burst open. Elena stood there, her face pale, her eyes wild. Behind her, Maribel clung to her skirt, sobbing. "Are you—" Elena's voice broke. "Are you hurt?" Silas glanced at his arm. "It's nothing." "You're bleeding." "I said it's nothing." But his legs chose that moment to give out. He sat down hard on the porch steps, his head spinning, the world tilting sideways. Elena was beside him in an instant. She knelt in front of him, her hands hovering over his wounded arm, uncertain. "Let me see," she said. "I'm fine." "Let me see." Silas didn't have the strength to argue. He let her push back his sleeve, revealing the deep graze where the bullet had carved a furrow through his flesh. It was bleeding freely, but not arterial. Painful, but not fatal. Elena's hands shook as she pressed her palm against the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. "You could have died," she whispered. "You could have—" "I didn't. They came for me." Her voice cracked. "They came for me, and you fought them. You could have just given me to them. You could have—" "No," Silas said, his voice hard. "I couldn't." Elena looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Why? Why would you do that? Why would you risk your life for someone like me?" Silas met her eyes. In the harsh morning light, she could see the scars that marked him, the physical ones on his face, his arms, and the deeper ones that lived behind his eyes. "Because you're not someone like you," he said quietly. "You're you. And Maribel's just a kid, and nobody is taking either of you from here unless you want to go." Something broke inside Elena. She pressed her forehead against his uninjured shoulder and wept, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Silas sat very still, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, carefully, he lifted his good arm and rested it across her shoulders. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." Maribel crept forward, her small face streaked with tears. She climbed onto the step beside Silas and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his side. "Don't die, Silas," she whispered. "Please, don't die." Silas's throat tightened. He looked down at the little girl clinging to him, at the woman crying against his shoulder, and felt something shift in his chest, something he'd thought was dead and buried with his family. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly, and he meant it. Elena pulled herself together first, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She stood, her jaw set with determination. "Come inside," she said. "I need to clean that properly." Silas let her help him to his feet and guide him into the house. She sat him down at the kitchen table and moved with swift efficiency. boiling water, tearing cloth into strips, gathering the bottle of whiskey Silas kept in the cupboard. Maribel watched from the corner, her eyes wide. Elena poured whiskey over Silas's wound. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," Elena murmured, dabbing at the torn flesh with a clean cloth. "Don't be. You're doing fine." She worked in silence, cleaning the wound thoroughly before binding it with strips of cloth. Her hands were steady now, her movements confident. When she finished, she tied off the bandage and sat back. "There," she said. "It should heal clean if you don't do anything stupid." "Like getting shot again?" "Exactly like that." Their eyes met. For a moment, something passed between them, something warm and unspoken. Then Elena looked away, her cheeks flushing. "You need to rest." "I need to check on the horse." "Silas, I need to check on the horse," he repeated, standing. He swayed slightly but steadied himself against the table. Elena grabbed his good arm. "At least let me come with you." He started to argue, then nodded. Together they walked to the barn, Maribel trailing behind them. The horse that had been shot was a young mare, one Silas had been training. The bullet had grazed her flank, leaving a shallow wound that bled but wasn't life-threatening. Silas ran his hand along her neck, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. The mare calmed under his touch, her breathing slowing. "She'll be all right," Elena said, watching him work. "You're good with them." "Had a lot of practice." Elena crossed her arms, leaning against the barn wall. "He'll come back, won't he? That man. Mercer." Silas didn't answer immediately. He finished tending to the mare, then turned to face her. "Maybe," he said, "but he's wounded. He'll need time to heal, time to gather more men." He paused. "We'll be ready." "We? You think I'm letting you face this alone?" Elena's eyes glistened. "You've already done more than—" "I'm not done," Silas said simply. She stared at him, this quiet, scarred man who'd become her unlikely protector. "I don't understand you." "Don't need to." "Yes, I do." She stepped closer. "Because I'm tired of running, Silas. I'm tired of being afraid. And if I'm going to stand and fight, if I'm going to trust you with my life and my daughter's life, I need to understand why you're doing this." Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because when I lost my family, I thought that was it. I thought I was done. That I'd just work this ranch until the day I died, and that would be enough." He paused, his voice roughening. "But then I saw your girl tugging on my coat, begging me to save you. And I saw you in that pen, beaten and broken, but still fighting, still breathing. And I thought—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I thought maybe I wasn't done after all." Elena's breath caught. "Silas, you brought something back to this house," he continued. "Something I thought was gone forever. Light, laughter, life." He met her eyes. "So no, I'm not letting Mercer or anyone else take that away. Not from you, not from Mari, and not from me." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Elena reached out and took his hand, his rough, calloused hand that had held a gun an hour ago and now held hers with surprising gentleness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for fighting for us." "I'd do it again," Silas said quietly. "Every time." Something shifted in Elena's chest. For years she'd been taught that men only wanted one thing, that kindness was a trap, that trust was weakness. But this man, this scarred, grieving rancher who slept on the floor outside her door and asked for nothing in return, had proven every one of those lessons wrong. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let herself believe in something different. She squeezed his hand once, then released it, stepping back. "Come on," she said, her voice steadier now. "You need to rest, and I need to make sure Maribel is all right." They walked back to the house together, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the prairie. Behind them, the blood on the porch was already drying in the heat. And somewhere out there, Jeb Mercer was wounded, angry, and planning his return. But for now, for this moment, they were safe, and they were together. And that, Elena thought, was enough. That evening, after Maribel had been put to bed, Elena found Silas sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkening prairie. His arm was bound, his rifle resting across his lap. keeping watch. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat down beside him. "You should be sleeping," she said. So should you." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, the soft whisper of wind through the grass. "When I was a girl," Elena said quietly, "my mother used to tell me that the world was divided into two kinds of people, those who take and those who get taken from." She looked down at her cup. "I always thought I was the second kind." "You're not," Silas said. "How do you know?" "Because you're still here, still fighting, still standing." He glanced at her. "That's not someone who gets taken from. That's someone who survives." Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." They lapsed into silence again. Then Elena said, "Tell me about your daughter." Silas went very still. "You don't have to," Elena added quickly. I thought maybe it would help to remember her." Silas was quiet for so long Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly he began to speak. "Her name was Sarah. She was 7 when she died." His voice was soft, distant. "She had her mother's laugh, this bright, wild thing that filled up every room. She loved horses, loved riding. She'd beg me every morning to take her out to the fields." Elena listened, not interrupting. "The day the storm came, she was helping her mother in the garden. I was out fixing a fence on the north pasture. By the time I saw the clouds rolling in, it was too late." He paused, his jaw tight. "I rode back as fast as I could, but the storm, it tore through everything, took the barn, took half the house. And when I finally found them..." His voice broke. Elena reached out and covered his hand with hers. "They were together," Silas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wife had wrapped herself around Sarah, trying to shield her, but it didn't matter. They were both..." He stopped, unable to finish. "I'm sorry," Elena said softly. "I'm so sorry." Silas nodded, blinking hard. "I buried them under the oak tree out back. Couldn't bring myself to leave this place, but I couldn't live in it either, so I just existed. For 6 years I just existed." "Until now," Elena said. "Until now," he agreed. She squeezed his hand. "Your daughter would be proud of you, for what you did today, for what you've done for us." Silas looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You think so?" "I know so." They sat together in the darkness, two broken people finding strength in each other until the stars filled the sky and the moon rose high overhead. And for the first time in 6 years, Silas Ward didn't feel quite so alone. The days after the attack moved differently, like time itself had shifted gears. Elena found herself watching Silas with new eyes. She noticed things she'd been too afraid to see before. The way he winced when he thought no one was looking, favoring his wounded arm. The way he still checked the horizon every hour, his hand never far from his rifle. The way he'd positioned himself between the door and the stairs every night, a living barrier between them and whatever might come through. He was healing, but slowly. The wound had been deeper than he'd admitted. An infection had tried to take hold in those first few days. Elena had tended it with fierce determination, changing bandages, applying poultices made from herbs she'd learned about as a girl in Sonora, sitting beside him when the fever came and refusing to leave even when he told her to rest. "You're stubborn," he'd muttered one night, his skin burning hot, his eyes glassy with fever. "So are you," she'd replied, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "I'll be fine." "Yes, you will, because I'm not letting you die." He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that neither could name, something that felt like the first green shoots pushing through winter soil. On the 5th day after the attack, the fever finally broke. Silas woke clear-headed for the first time, finding Elena asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still holding the cloth that had fallen into her lap. The morning light caught the exhaustion on her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hair had come loose from its braid. She'd stayed. Through everything, she'd stayed. Silas reached out slowly, carefully, and touched her hand. Elena's eyes flew open, and she sat up so fast the cloth fell to the floor. "You're awake," she breathed, pressing her palm to his forehead. The fever's gone. Thank God the fever's gone. How long was I? 2 days. Well, 2.5 if you count the times you were delirious. She managed a tired smile. You're a terrible patient, by the way. Kept trying to get up, kept saying you had to check the perimeter. Should check the perimeter. Silas Ward, if you try to get out of that bed right now, I will tie you to it. He almost smiled. Almost. You've been taking care of me this whole time? Someone had to. You should have rested. I did. When you did. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Now, you're going to stay in this bed for at least today. Drink water, eat soup, and let yourself heal. Understand? Yes, ma'am. This time she did smile. Good. I'll go make you something to eat. As she turned to leave, Silas caught her hand. She stopped, looking back at him. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying. Elena's eyes softened. Where else would I go? She squeezed his hand once, then left the room, closing the door gently behind her. Downstairs, Maribel was at the kitchen table, carefully sorting dried beans into piles by color, a task Elena had given her to keep her occupied and away from Silas's room during the worst of the fever. Is he better, Mama? She asked, looking up hopefully. Yes, mija. He's better. Maribel's whole face lit up. Can I see him? Later. Let him rest a little more first. Elena moved to the stove, stoking the fire. Are you hungry? A little. Mama? Yes? Are we going to stay here forever? Elena's hands stilled on the pot she'd been reaching for. I don't know, mi amor. I want to stay. I like it here. And I like Silas. I know you do. Don't you like him? Elena turned to look at her daughter. Maribel was watching her with those two knowing eyes, the ones that had seen far too much for a 4-year-old. Yes, Elena said softly. I do. Then why can't we stay? Because things aren't always that simple. Why not? Elena knelt down beside her daughter's chair, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because Silas saved us, mija. But that doesn't mean he wants us here forever. This is his home, his life. He told me we could stay as long as we wanted, Maribel said. He told me that yesterday when you were sleeping and he was awake for a little bit. I asked him if we had to leave when he got better, and he said no. He said this was our home now, if we wanted it to be. Elena's breath caught. He said that? Maribel nodded solemnly. He said his daughter would have liked having a sister, and that I reminded him of her, and that it was nice having people in the house again. She tilted her head. What's wrong, Mama? Why are you crying? Nothing's wrong, baby. Nothing at all. Elena pulled Maribel into a fierce hug, pressing her face into her daughter's hair. Everything's just right. That afternoon, after Silas had eaten and dozed off again, Elena found herself standing in the doorway of his room, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful, the hard lines softened by rest. His wounded arm lay across his chest, the bandages clean and white. He'd said they could stay, that this could be their home. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She'd spent so long running, so long surviving, that the idea of stopping, of staying, felt impossible, like trying to hold water in her hands. But maybe, she thought, maybe this time could be different. Maybe this man with his quiet strength and his broken heart could be the home she'd been searching for all along. The thought should have felt dangerous. It should have sent her running for the door. Instead, it felt like coming home. 3 days later, Silas was back on his feet against Elena's protests and the doctor's orders, though there'd been no doctor to give orders, just Elena's fierce insistence that he take it easy. I've been lying in bed for nearly a week, Silas said, pulling on his boots. The horses need tending, the fence needs fixing, and You need to not tear your stitches open, Elena said firmly, hands on her hips. At least let me help you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. They stared at each other for a moment, engaged in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Silas nodded. All right, but you're staying away from anything heavy. Deal. They worked together that day, falling into an easy rhythm. Elena proved surprisingly capable with the horses, her hands gentle but confident as she brushed them down and checked their hooves. Silas watched her work, noting the way she spoke softly to the animals, the way they calmed under her touch. "You've done this before," he observed. "My father had horses. Before—" She stopped, her hand stilling on the brush. "Before everything fell apart." Silas didn't push. He just handed her a bucket of oats and moved on to the next stall. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by the soft sounds of the horses and the distant call of birds. It felt natural, working beside her, like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. When they finished, Elena stood in the barn doorway, looking out at the ranch. The sun was high overhead, warming the prairie grass, making it shimmer like gold. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. "It is. Lonely, though, before we came." Silas came to stand beside her. "Yeah, it was." She turned to look at him. "Do you ever think about leaving, starting over somewhere new?" "Every day for 6 years." "But you stayed." "Couldn't leave them, my wife and daughter. They're buried here." Elena nodded slowly. "I understand." "But it's different now," Silas continued, his voice rough. "Now there's a reason to stay that's not just about the past. There's—" He stopped, struggling for words. "There's what?" Elena asked softly. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw everything he couldn't say written in his eyes. "There's tomorrow," he said finally. "There's the sound of Maribel laughing in the yard. There's breakfast at the table instead of alone. There's—" He paused. "There's you." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Silas, I'm not good with words," he said, "and I don't know how to— I can't promise I won't mess this up. But what I can promise is that as long as you and Mari want to stay here, you'll have a home. You'll be safe. You'll be—" He took a breath. "You'll be family." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "You mean that?" "I mean that." She took a step closer to him, close enough that she could see the silver in his dark hair, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the depth of sincerity in his gray eyes. "I've never had a family," she whispered. "Not really. Not one that chose me instead of being bound by blood. You have one now, if you want it." Elena reached up slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and cupped his scarred face in her hand. He went very still, his breath catching. "I want it," she said. "God help me. I want it so much it scares me." Silas covered her hand with his own. "Then stay, both of you. Stay and let this be home." "What about Mercer? What about the men who'll come looking? Let them come. We'll be ready. You can't fight the whole world for us. Watch me." The fierce certainty in his voice made her believe him, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could actually have this. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. His arms came around her slowly, carefully, holding her like she was something precious. They stood like that for a long moment, two damaged souls finding strength in each other, while the prairie wind whispered through the grass and the sun climbed higher in the endless Texas sky. That evening, after Maribel had been fed and bathed and tucked into bed, Elena found Silas on the porch again. But this time, instead of sitting apart, she sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Tell me about Sonora," he said after a while. "About your family, about before." Elena was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak. "My father was a horse trader. We lived in a small village in the mountains, far from the cities. It was beautiful, wild and harsh, but beautiful." She smiled at the memory. "I had a brother, Diego. He was 2 years older than me, always getting into trouble, always making me laugh." "What happened to him?" "The fever. Swept through the village one winter. Took him and my father both within a week." Her voice grew thick. "My mother tried to hold things together, but without my father's trade we had nothing. She remarried a year later. A man who seemed kind at first." Silas heard the pain in her voice. "He wasn't." "No, he wasn't." Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "When I turned 16, he started looking at me differently, and one night he—" She stopped, unable to continue. Silas's jaw tightened. You don't have to, I ran, Elena said. I took what little money I could find and I ran. Met a man in the next town who said he could help me get to America, start a new life. He seemed kind, too. She laughed bitterly. I learned too late that kindness is often just a mask. Maribel's father? Elena nodded. He wasn't who he said he was. By the time I realized I was already pregnant, he disappeared the day I told him. I never saw him again. She looked down at her hands. I tried to make it work, took jobs where I could. But being alone, pregnant, with no family, people look at you different, treat you different. How did you end up at the market? I made a mistake, trusted the wrong person. Again. Her voice hardened. A woman who said she could help me find work. Instead, she sold me to men who traded people like livestock. They took Maribel to make sure I'd cooperate. Said if I fought, they'd hurt her. Jesus, Silas breathed. I spent 3 weeks in those pens before you found us. 3 weeks watching people get bought and sold like animals. 3 weeks knowing my daughter was being kept somewhere, scared and alone, and there was nothing I could do. Tears streamed down her face. And then Mari escaped somehow. Found her way to the market. Found you. She's brave, like her mother. I'm not brave. I've just learned to survive. That's the same thing. Elena turned to look at him. You really believe that? I know it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Your turn. Tell me something real. Silas was silent for a long time. Then he said, I think about them every day, my wife and daughter. Some days it's like they died yesterday. Other days it feels like a lifetime ago. He stared out at the darkness. For 6 years, I've been stuck between those two feelings, never moving forward, never really letting go. And now? Now I'm learning that maybe I don't have to let go. Maybe I just have to make room for something new alongside the old. He looked at her. Maybe I can hold on to their memory and still build a future. Maybe it's not betraying them to be happy again. They'd want you to be happy, Elena said softly. I think they would. He paused. I think they'd like you, both of you. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. I wish I could have met them. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, and another answered. Silas? Elena said after a while. Yeah? Thank you for letting us stay, for giving us a home, for... She stopped, searching for the right words. For choosing us. Thank you for staying. Elena reached over and took his hand. He squeezed back, his calloused palm warm against hers. They sat like that until the moon rose high and the night grew cold, neither wanting to break the spell of this moment, neither willing to let go. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. The wound on Silas's arm healed into an angry red scar that would fade with time. Maribel grew more confident, helping with chores without being asked, chattering away to the horses and chickens like they were old friends. And Elena began to bloom. Silas saw it in the way she moved through the house, no longer tiptoeing like a guest, in the way she hummed while she cooked old songs from her childhood, in the way she laughed at Maribel's stories, real and unguarded. She was healing. They all were. One afternoon, while Maribel was napping and Silas was repairing a broken harness in the barn, Elena approached him with purpose in her step. Teach me, she said without preamble. Silas looked up from his work. Teach you what? To shoot. To defend myself. To defend Maribel. Her jaw was set, determined. If Mercer comes back, or anyone else, I don't want to be helpless. I want to fight beside you. Silas studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. Come on. He led her out to the clearing behind the barn, where he'd set up targets for practice. Old bottles lined up on fence posts, a scarred piece of wood propped against a tree. He pulled his pistol from its holster and handed it to her. It's heavier than it looks. And louder. Elena took it, feeling the weight of it in her hand. Show me. Silas stood behind her, guiding her arms into position, showing her how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. Breathe in. Let it out slow, right at the bottom of your breath. That's when you shoot. Elena fired. The recoil jerked her arms up, the sound cracking across the prairie. The bottle she'd aimed at remained intact. Again, Silas said. She fired again, and again, and again. On the seventh shot, the bottle shattered. Elena lowered the gun, her hands shaking from adrenaline and something that felt like power. Good, Silas said. Real good. They practiced until the sun began to set and Elena's hands ached from gripping the pistol. By the end, she was hitting more targets than she missed. You're a natural, Silas observed, reloading the weapon. I'm motivated. I noticed. Elena handed him back the gun. Thank you for teaching me, for trusting me with this. You're part of this family now. That means you get to defend it too. The word family still felt strange and wonderful on her tongue, but she was learning to accept it, learning to believe it. Silas? She said as they walked back to the house. Yeah? When this is over, when we're truly safe, what do you want? He was quiet for a moment. Honestly? Honestly. I want morning coffee on the porch. I want to teach Mari to ride properly. I want to hear you singing while you work. He stopped walking, turning to face her. I want ordinary days and quiet nights, and nothing more dramatic than a storm rolling through. I want... He stopped, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I want to build something with you. Something that lasts. Elena felt her heart stutter. You mean that? Every word. She stepped closer, looking up into his weathered face, this good man who'd become her salvation. Then that's what we'll build, she said. Together. Together, he agreed. And there, in the fading light of day, with the prairie stretching endlessly around them and the house waiting warm behind them, Elena Cruz and Silas Ward made a silent promise to each other. To fight for this. To protect this. To build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. They didn't kiss. Not yet. That would come later. But they stood close, hands almost touching, hearts beating in tandem. And that was enough. For now, that was more than enough. Winter came early that year, arriving on the back of a cold wind that stripped the last leaves from the cottonwoods and turned the prairie grass the color of old gold. 3 months had passed since the attack. 3 months of watching the horizon, sleeping light, keeping weapons close. 3 months of waiting for Jeb Mercer to make good on his promise to return. But the horizon remained empty. The nights stayed quiet. And slowly, cautiously, life began to settle into something that looked almost like peace. Silas had reinforced the ranch. New locks on the doors, shutters that could be barred from inside, a bell rigged near the barn that could be rung in case of trouble. He'd also made a trip into town, speaking quietly with the sheriff, a grizzled man named Garrett, who'd known Silas for years. You did right by those women, Garrett had said, leaning back in his chair, his boots propped on his desk. Word's gotten around about what you did, about Mercer and his men. Any sign of him? Not hide nor hair. My guess? He crawled back to whatever hole he came from to lick his wounds. Men like that don't take kindly to being bested. Garrett had fixed Silas with a meaningful look. But they also don't forget, you keep your eyes open, Ward. Always do. Good. And Ward? Yeah? Those women of yours, they're lucky to have you. Silas had nodded, the words settling somewhere warm in his chest. His women. His family. When had that happened? When had these two souls he'd rescued become the very center of his world? He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Maybe it was when Maribel had climbed into his lap one evening and fallen asleep against his chest, trusting and peaceful. Maybe it was when Elena had touched his face with gentle hands while changing his bandage, her eyes soft with something that looked like affection. Maybe it was the first morning he'd woken to the smell of coffee he hadn't made himself, to the sound of voices that weren't ghosts. Or maybe it had been that very first day, when a little girl had looked up at him with desperate eyes and asked him to save her mother. Maybe he'd been lost from that moment on. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. One morning in late November, Silas woke to find the world transformed. Snow had fallen during the night, the first real snow of the season, blanketing everything in pristine white. The ranch looked like something from a dream, peaceful and still. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, finding Elena already in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. She looked up when he entered, her face brightening in a way that made his heart skip. "Good morning," she said. "Did you see the snow?" "Hard to miss." Maribel's going to lose her mind when she wakes up. She's never seen snow before. Silas poured himself coffee, watching Elena work. She'd changed in these months, filled out from regular meals, her skin glowing with health, her movements confident and sure. She wore one of his old shirts over her dress, the sleeves rolled up, her hair twisted into a loose braid. She looked beautiful. The thought came unbidden, but Silas didn't push it away. He was done pretending he didn't feel what he felt. "Elena," he said. She looked up, something in his tone catching her attention. "Yes?" He opened his mouth, trying to find the words, but before he could speak, they heard a shriek of pure joy from upstairs. "Mama! Mama! Come look!" Maribel came thundering down the stairs in her nightgown, her eyes wide with wonder. "There's white everywhere. What is it? What happened?" Elena laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's snow, mija, remember? I told you about it? But I didn't know it would be so beautiful." Maribel pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Can I go outside? Can I touch it?" "After breakfast. And after you get dressed properly. You'll freeze in that nightgown." Maribel raced back upstairs, and Elena shook her head with an indulgent smile. She's going to talk about this for days. "Let her," Silas said. "Kids should get to be excited about things." Elena's smile softened. "You're good with her, you know. Better than her own father ever would have been. She makes it easy." "It's not just that. You care, really care. That's not something that can be faked." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "You've given her something I never could on my own. Stability, safety, a father." Silas's throat tightened. "I'm not. You are. In every way that matters, you are." Elena reached out and touched his arm. "And I want you to know, both of us, we see it. We're grateful for it. You don't have to be grateful." "Yes, I do. Because what you've done for us, what you've given us, it's everything." They stood close, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Silas could smell the bread dough on her hands, see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, feel the warmth radiating from her body. He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to kiss her. But Maribel came bounding back downstairs, now dressed in layers of clothing, her excitement palpable. "Can we go now? Please, please, please." Elena laughed, stepping back. "Yes, we can go now, but you listen to Silas, understand? Snow can be dangerous if you're not careful." "I'll be careful, I promise." They bundled up and headed outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, the snow crunching under their boots. Maribel ran ahead, squealing with delight as she kicked up clouds of white powder. "Look, I'm making clouds with my feet." Silas and Elena followed at a slower pace, watching her explore this new world. "I wish I could see it through her eyes," Elena said softly. "Everything is magic to her. Maybe that's how it should be." "Maybe." Maribel bent down and scooped up a handful of snow, staring at it in wonder as it melted against her warm palm. Then she looked up, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Silas, catch!" She threw the snowball, or tried to. It fell apart midair, scattering into powder. Silas raised an eyebrow. "That was a pretty weak throw, kid. Show me how to do it right." He knelt beside her, showing her how to pack the snow tight, how to aim, how to follow through with her throw. Maribel watched with intense concentration, then tried again. This time the snowball held together. It flew through the air and hit Silas square in the chest. Maribel gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" But Silas was grinning, actually grinning. "That was a perfect shot. Really? Really. Now run, because you just started a snowball fight." Maribel shrieked with laughter and took off running. Silas formed a snowball and lobbed it gently, catching her on the shoulder. She retaliated with another throw, then another. Elena watched them play, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what she'd dreamed of for her daughter. Joy, laughter, childhood. "Mama, help me!" Maribel called. "We need to team up." Elena laughed and joined in, the three of them chasing each other around the yard, throwing snowballs and laughing until their sides ached. For those precious moments, there was no danger, no fear, no past trauma. There was only this: family, playing in the first snow of winter. Eventually, they collapsed in a heap, breathless and rosy-cheeked. Maribel lay between them, her small body warm and solid, her laughter still bubbling up in little bursts. "That was the best day ever," she declared. "The day's not even half over yet," Silas pointed out. "I don't care. Best day ever." Elena met Silas's eyes over Maribel's head, and something passed between them. Something warm and bright and full of possibility. "This is real," that look said. "This is ours." That evening, after Maribel had been tucked into bed, exhausted from a full day of snow adventures, Elena found Silas in his workshop, a small shed near the barn where he kept his tools and worked on various projects. He was bent over his workbench, focused on something she couldn't quite see. The lantern light cast shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his eyes. "What are you making?" she asked from the doorway. Silas looked up, startled. Then he smiled. A small, private smile that made her stomach flutter. "Something I should have made weeks ago." Elena stepped inside, curious. On the workbench lay a small brass ring, simple and unadorned except for intricate engravings along the band. Her breath caught. It's from a firing pin," Silas said quietly. "From the gun that saved you. That saved all of us." He picked it up, turning it over in his calloused fingers. "I melted it down, reformed it. Figured it was fitting, something that was used for violence becoming something that symbolizes—" He stopped, suddenly uncertain. "Symbolizes what?" Elena whispered, moving closer. Silas set down the ring and turned to face her fully. "Elena, I'm not good at this. I'm not good with words or feelings or any of the things a man should be good at when he's trying to tell a woman." He stopped, took a breath. "When I lost my family, I thought I was done. Thought I'd just exist until I didn't anymore. But then you came here. You and Mari, and you brought life back into this house. Into me." Elena's eyes were shining with tears. "I know we haven't known each other long," Silas continued. "I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but I also know that every morning I wake up grateful you're here. Every night I go to sleep thankful you stayed, and I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." He picked up the ring again, holding it out to her. "This isn't much, and I'm not much. Just a broken-down rancher with more scars than sense. But if you'll have me, if you'll let me, I want to make this official. I want you to be my wife, want Mari to be my daughter, want us to be a family not just in our hearts but in the eyes of God and the law and anyone else who cares to look." Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Silas, you don't have to answer now. I just wanted you to know, wanted you to understand what you mean to me, what you both mean to me." Elena stepped forward and took the ring from his hand, holding it up to the lantern light. The engravings caught the glow. Tiny flowers, delicate and beautiful, etched into the brass with painstaking care. "When did you do this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Been working on it for weeks. Every night after you went to bed. Wanted it to be perfect." "It is perfect." Elena looked up at him, her dark eyes blazing with something fierce and beautiful. "And yes," Silas went very still. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be your wife. Yes to all of it." She laughed through her tears. "Did you think I'd say no?" "I thought you might need time. Thought you might—" She kissed him. It was sudden and impulsive and perfect. Her lips were soft against his, tasting of salt and tea and promise. Silas stood frozen for one heartbeat, two, and then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back, with 6 years of loneliness and longing poured into that single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elena rested her forehead against his chest. "I love you," she whispered. "I didn't want to. I was so afraid to. But I do. I love you, Silas Ward." I love you too, he said, the words rusty but real. Both of you. My family. Elena held up her hand and Silas slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the brass warm against her skin. When? She asked. Whenever you want. Soon. I don't want to wait. I've waited long enough for happiness. Then soon it is. They stood together in the workshop, holding each other while the snow fell softly outside and the lantern burned low. Two broken people who'd found each other in the darkest of places, choosing love over fear, hope over despair. Choosing each other. 3 weeks later, on a bright December morning with the prairie blanketed in white, Elena Cruz and Silas Ward stood in the small clearing behind the house, the same clearing where his wife and daughter were buried beneath the old oak tree. The sheriff officiated, his voice carrying across the still air. A handful of neighbors had come, good people who'd heard the story, who admired what Silas had done, who wanted to witness this new beginning. Elena wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, white with blue flowers embroidered along the hem. Her hair was loose, flowing down her back, crowned with a wreath of dried prairie flowers that Maribel had insisted on making. Silas wore his best shirt, clean and pressed, his hair combed back, his beard trimmed. He couldn't stop looking at Elena, couldn't believe this was real. And Maribel? Maribel wore a new dress of soft yellow, her hair in 2 neat braids tied with ribbons. She stood beside them, holding a basket of flower petals she was supposed to scatter, but kept forgetting about because she was too excited. Do you, Silas Ward, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Sheriff Garrett asked. I do. Silas's voice was steady, certain. And do you, Elena Cruz, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Elena's voice rang clear and strong. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Garrett grinned. Go on and kiss her, Ward. Make it official. Silas cupped Elena's face in his hands and kissed her softly, sweetly, sealing the promise they'd made to each other. The small crowd applauded, and Maribel finally remembered her flower petals, throwing them into the air with a whoop of joy. When they broke apart, Elena was crying and smiling all at once. We did it, she whispered. We're really married. We're really married, Silas confirmed. Maribel tugged on his pant leg. Does this mean I can call you Papa now? Silas knelt down to her level, his eyes suspiciously bright. You can call me whatever you want, sweetheart. Papa, she said decisively. I want to call you Papa. Silas pulled her into a fierce hug, this little girl who'd become his daughter in every way that mattered. Then Papa it is. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. The neighbors brought food, roasted chicken, fresh bread, apple pie. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was music and dancing in the yard despite the cold. Silas danced with Elena, then with Maribel, spinning them both until they were dizzy with laughter. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sheriff Garrett pulled Silas aside. Got some news for you, he said quietly. Silas tensed. What kind of news? The good kind. Jeb Mercer's dead. Silas stared at him. What? Got word from a marshal down south. Mercer tried to pull the same stunt on another ranch. Guy he targeted wasn't as merciful as you. Shot him dead before he even got off his horse. Garrett clapped Silas on the shoulder. It's over, Ward. You're safe. Your family's safe. Silas felt something inside him release, a tension he'd been carrying for months. He's really gone? Really gone. His men scattered, won't be bothering anyone anymore. Silas nodded slowly, letting it sink in. It was over. The threat that had hung over them like a dark cloud was gone. They were free. Truly, completely free. Thank you, he said, for everything. Just doing my job. Now get back to your bride before she thinks you're ignoring her on your wedding day. Silas returned to Elena, pulling her aside to share the news. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears of relief. It's really over? She whispered. It's really over. Elena threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. We can breathe now. We can just live. That's the plan. They held each other as the celebration continued around them. As the sun set and the stars emerged one by one, as their daughter played with the neighbor children, her laughter ringing across the prairie. This was home. This was family. This was everything they'd fought for. And it was theirs. The winter passed in a blur of quiet happiness. Silas taught Maribel to ride properly, sitting behind her on the old mare, his arms around her to keep her safe. Elena filled the house with warmth, curtains in the windows, rugs on the floors, the smell of cooking and the sound of humming. At night, Silas and Elena would lie together in the bed they now shared, talking in low voices about their days, their dreams, their plans for the future. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just held each other in the darkness, grateful for the warmth and the company and the simple miracle of not being alone. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, revealing the prairie grass beneath, green and new. The horses grew sleek and healthy. The chickens laid eggs. Life continued its eternal cycle. One morning in late April, Silas woke to find Elena sitting by the window, her hand resting on her stomach, a strange expression on her face. "You all right?" he asked, concerned. She turned to him, and her face was radiant. "I think I'm pregnant." Silas sat up, his heart pounding. "You think... Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I know my body. And I'm late, and I feel..." She smiled. "I feel different, good different." Silas crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling in front of her, placing his hand over hers on her stomach. "A baby?" "A baby." He looked up at her, this woman who'd become his everything, and felt tears prick his eyes. "I didn't think... After everything, I didn't think I'd get this chance again." "You're getting it. We're getting it." Elena cupped his face in her hand. "Another chance. A new beginning. I'm going to be a father again. You already are a father, to Maribel. This is just..." She smiled. "This is more." Silas stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. They told Maribel at breakfast. She stared at them for a long moment, processing, and then her whole face lit up. "I'm going to be a big sister." "You're going to be a big sister," Elena confirmed. Maribel squealed and jumped from her chair, running around the kitchen in circles. "I'm going to teach them everything, how to feed the chickens and brush the horses and make flower crowns and..." "First they have to be born," Silas said with a laugh. "That's going to take a while." "How long?" "Several months." Maribel's face fell slightly. "That's forever." "It'll go faster than you think," Elena assured her. And it did. Summer came, hot and bright. Elena's stomach grew round, and Maribel talked to it constantly, telling the baby stories and singing songs she made up herself. Silas built a cradle in his workshop, carving it from oak, sanding it smooth, making it perfect. In September, on a cool morning when the leaves were just beginning to turn, Elena went into labor. The local midwife came, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Patterson, who shooed Silas and Maribel out of the bedroom with firm instructions to stay downstairs and stay out of the way. Silas paced the kitchen for hours, Maribel sitting at the table watching him with worried eyes. "Is Mama going to be okay?" she asked in a small voice. "She's going to be fine," Silas said with more confidence than he felt. "She's strong. The strongest person I know. But what if she's..." "No what ifs. She's going to be fine." When the baby finally came, its first cry rang through the house like a bell. Silas froze mid-pace, his heart in his throat. Mrs. Patterson appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling. "You can come up now, both of you." They raced upstairs, Maribel clinging to Silas's hand. In the bedroom, Elena lay propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft white cloth. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Silas approached slowly, reverently. Elena pulled back the cloth, revealing a small red face, eyes scrunched shut, tiny fists waving in the air. "A boy," Silas breathed. "A boy," Elena confirmed. "I was thinking, if it's all right with you, we could name him Samuel. After your father?" Silas's vision blurred. "You remembered." "I remember everything you tell me." Maribel climbed onto the bed, peering at her baby brother with wonder. "He's so small." "You were that small once," Elena said. "Can I hold him?" "When you're sitting down properly, yes." They arranged Maribel carefully, supporting her arms, and Elena placed the baby in her lap. Maribel stared down at Samuel with an expression of pure awe. "Hi, baby brother," she whispered. "I'm your big sister. I'm going to take care of you forever and ever." Samuel yawned, and Maribel giggled. "He's perfect." "He is," Silas agreed, sitting on the edge of the bed, his arm around Elena. "You're all perfect." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "We did it. We actually did it." "Did what?" "Built a family, found happiness, made a home from all our broken pieces." Silas kissed the top of her head. "Best thing I ever did was pay $70 in gold for two strangers." Elena laughed softly. "Best thing I ever did was trust a scarred rancher who slept on the floor outside my door." They sat together, the four of them, as the afternoon sun streamed through the window and painted everything in golden light. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions. The horses grazed peacefully. The chickens scratched in the yard. Life continued, simple and beautiful. Years would pass. Samuel would grow strong and healthy, learning to ride before he could barely walk. Maribel would become a fierce protector of her little brother, teaching him everything she knew. There would be more children eventually, 2 more daughters born in quick succession, filling the house with chaos and laughter. The ranch would prosper. The community would grow to know and respect the Ward family. Elena would become known for her healing skills, using the knowledge her mother had taught her to help neighbors through illness and injury. Silas would teach his children to be kind, to be strong, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. They would face hardships, as all families do. Droughts, harsh winters, the occasional threat from men with bad intentions. But they would face them together, and they would endure. Because they were built from survivors, from people who'd refused to give up even when the world told them to, from 2 broken souls who'd found each other in the darkest moment and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. But all of that was still to come. For now, in this perfect moment, there was only this: a family, newly formed, sitting together in a bedroom filled with sunlight and love, from a little girl's desperate plea in a slave market, from a mother who'd thought she'd lost everything, from a man who'd believed his life was over. A family had been born, not by blood, not by law, but by choice, by courage, by the simple decision to open wounded hearts and let love in. And they never looked back. Years later, when Silas was old and gray, sitting on the porch watching his grandchildren play in the yard, Elena would sit beside him and take his hand. "Do you remember that day?" she would ask. "At the market?" "Every single moment," he would reply. "Do you ever regret it? Paying for us? Taking us in?" Silas would turn to her, this woman who'd become his whole world, and smile. "Not for a single second. Best $70 I ever spent." And Elena would laugh. That bright, beautiful laugh he'd first heard on a spring morning years ago, and rest her head on his shoulder while they watched their legacy play out before them. A legacy built on kindness, on courage, on the choice to see the humanity in strangers and offer them everything. A legacy that would endure long after they were gone, passed down through generations of children who would hear the story of how their family began and would learn that sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with romance. Sometimes they start with a desperate child, a broken woman, and a man who couldn't walk away. Sometimes they start with a single word: no. No, you can't take her. No, I won't turn away. No, I won't let you suffer alone. One word, one moment, one choice. And from that, everything else followed. The end.